All right, good morning, everyone. Some reflections on computational diplomacy, even though I'm neither a diplomat nor a political scientist, I'm a computational social scientist. But those are some keywords that come to my mind. It's data science, computer-based modeling, including game theory and agent-based modeling, computational social science, including digital platforms, lab and web experiments, ethics, mechanism design, digital assistance, and complex system science or complexity science, as some people say, including network science. And my talk will touch upon all of this. The paper that probably comes closest to the subject of diplomacy is this paper on group segregation and urban violence. It looks into data in the Middle East, Jerusalem in particular, and into some counterfactual scenarios based on a data-based, agent-based model. I'll not go into details of this paper, though. There are enough grand challenges to address. Our main problem is probably the lack of sustainability of the world's economy. People are worried about climate change, water scarcity, spreading of international tensions. Thomas, do you recognize that picture? It's from you. And pandemics, to mention just a few of those grand challenges. And I think diplomacy is about managing resources, scarce resources in particular, but not only. Of course, it's also about a good life. And so all those things that matter to humans, like friendship, love, creativity, freedom, and so on, which are hard to measure, also need to be considered. Altogether, I don't expect that things will get easier because many systems become more networked and complex. And so new tools are needed and also new fields of science, and that's why we're here together. Moreover, there are now emerging shortages, it seems, of computer chips, of gas, fuel, electricity, heat, food, who knows, perhaps also mobility as a consequence. So basically, we have to reorganize our system, our world. Just a note, we've been publishing about the subject of natural gas networks and their resilience to certain disruptions, including Ukrainian and Russian scenarios back in 2014 already. Was kind of surprised that this has not been all implemented in the meantime. So there's a lot of excitement about the scenarios that are now happening. And unfortunately, all of those things that we need to talk about also include an issue that is often referred to as overpopulation. Here are some predictions of the Club of Rome, which basically suggests that there would be a collapse of our economy, and that would also have a huge impact on population and death rates. And apparently, many people take those scenarios seriously, so seriously that they're thinking about solutions. And in that connection, they're talking about trolley problems and so-called moral machines. I'm not even sure that's a proper name, probably not. And as you all know, during the pandemic, we've already been faced with triage decisions, and those decisions are partially done using digital tools and personal data. So this is all quite scary. Now, science may come at our rescue. Big data was a big hope in that connection. And of course, in the meantime, there's a lot of big data really, and a lot of this data are about us. We are being observed in great detail. The CIA Director Gus Hunt in 2013 said that quite explicitly. You're already a walking sensor platform. and it is really very nearly within our grasp, he said, to be able to compute on all human-generated information. And you probably still don't have any idea what that really means. I'm trying to give you that perspective. But the hope was that basically soon you will be able to know everything. We would be able to understand the human body, brain, and personality and fix the world. But it doesn't stop with observation or surveillance of the world. Actually, we are now living in cybernetic data-driven AI-controlled societies where those data are fed back and the system is changed according to certain kind of principles that are encoded in algorithms. And the idea is quite old, and it has also been implemented already a long time ago. Here's a book which describes the attempts in Chile, but also Singapore became quite famous for this. And we should assume that we have some sort of similar system in almost every country around the world. And those systems are using knowledge of your personality. That personality has been mapped out in great detail. There have been digital avatars. In the meantime, there are attempts to create digital twins that would basically be identical digital representations of you. That's the goal. And of course, we are not yet there. And you may ask yourself, where is all the data coming from? It's not just the social media and your smartphone and all those sorts of other smart devices that are delivering this data, but there's currently work on the Internet of bio-nano things, where basically nanoparticles spread around the world and in the body would be used to read out data. And of course, where it's possible to read out data, it's also possible to manipulate those data to change them. The goal is declared to be to improve human health and well-being. And as you can see over here, the World Economic Forum is also pushing for this. And they said back in 2020, the Internet of Bodies is here. So apparently it's already being operated to some extent. There are even attempts to create digital twins of the entire world. You can imagine that the military is interested in this, and this is being used not only to watch what is going on in the world, but also to prepare wars and psychological operations, as kind of psychological warfare, if you want. And so the question comes up, could we fix the world with a war room approach, with all the data that is now basically available to some institutions or companies? And in fact, this is the word they're using, war room. And so the concern that I have is that we would easily end up in a militarization that even goes so far to have in-body surveillance and also to make our body and mind part of the military battlefield. And there are quite some articles and books about this. So the human body digitization and Internet of Bodies will basically open up a new dimension of military operations. This is a thesis written at the Naval War College, the algorithm of you, your profile of preference, or an agent for evil. So they're concerned themselves. There are books about military neuroscience and brain science in the military in the 21st century. And so the question that we need to ask is our civilization being replaced by a militarization? Already some years ago, I've therefore demanded, together with Peter Seele, in nature, that we should replace the war room approach by a peace room approach, which would be characterized by more transparency, democratic framework, interdisciplinary teams of scientists, ethical experts, a multi-perspective approach, and participatory opportunities, because I expect this to result in better solutions for the world. The war room approach uses in particular a big data analytics approach. And of course, that approach is powerful, but as we'll see, it also has limitations, and some of them are quite concerning. To start with the positive thing, it's possible really to look into large systems such as traffic systems or scientific productivity and impact, spreading of culture, and a lot more. Anything that comes with data can be visualized. But it's not always trivial how to connect the dots and how to refine the raw data to come up with useful information and wisdom. Chris Anderson, initially back in 2008, had still the idea that we would see the end of theory. He thought we should just let the data speak for itself, and he would tell the truth. The scientific method would become obsolete. And this is a perspective that we don't share anymore in science. Because there are a lot of issues of the data analytics approach, which doesn't care about what kind of data is in a certain file. So among the issues are sensitivity to parameter changes and uncertainty. Correlations do not necessarily mean causation. Correlations and patterns in the data may be spurious, meaningless. We could be facing overfitting, and that means not see the forest for the trees. We may take noise for something meaningful. There might be issues with machine learning. Those machine learning approaches and AI systems may not converge, even though that's most of the time assumed to be the case. A lot of the algorithms and AI systems turn out to have biases. Those biases may be discriminatory in nature, and that has been quite concerning for a lot of people. There will be classification problems. That means false positives and false negatives. And that is particularly concerning in connection with predictive policing approaches and algorithm-based policing, because error rates are usually high, often above 90%. And we really need to keep that in mind. And for all those reasons, we need and want understandable tools and explainable results. And that brings us to data science, which is basically data analytics plus science. Data science brings together statistical knowledge with data mining, with domain knowledge, and a couple of other fields. Just to give you an example where it makes a difference, let's talk about Google flu trends, which was often mentioned as a key success story in the beginning of big data analytics. And then it eventually didn't work anymore. It was criticized and shut down. What we've done, Dirk Brockman and I, back in 2013, approximately, we've been combining different data sets, namely data about infections with data about air travel. And as you can see, if we just represent the data in geographic space, there's a large scattering of data. So basically, we don't see any patterns. It's not helping us. However, it's possible to use the air travel volume to define a new effective distance. So Frankfurt and New York and Zurich and Tokyo would be close by because there's a lot of traffic volume. While some cities that are close by in geographic space may actually have a larger distance. Now, if we do this and represent the same data in that new kind of space, then it turns out that there are characteristic spreading patterns that we can understand, and suddenly the data can speak to us. We can make predictions about where the flu wave would hit next, and we could take preparations and proactive measures to be better prepared to cope with the flu or whatever it is. So even though this study was not exactly working with big data, combining two kinds of data sets and some scientific knowledge about the spreading process, that's why we consider the air traffic volume, gives us actually a better insight. So data science is better than data analytics because it can fix some of those problems that I mentioned. I don't repeat them again. But data science is still a reductionistic approach. And they're complex systems. And in fact, the world is full of them. And the world gets ever more complex. What are complex systems? These are systems with a large number of interacting system elements, often nonlinear or network interactions. Typically, there's a rich system behavior, dynamic rather than static, probabilistic rather than deterministic in many cases. They may behave in very surprising and sometimes even paradoxical ways, hardly predictable, seemingly uncontrollable, and they seem to be everywhere. But most people know nothing about it, including, unfortunately, a lot of scientists, a lot of politicians, a lot of managers in business. And that's why we have all those problems. Just to give you some examples for those emergent self-organizing patterns that occur in complex systems, let's take pedestrian flows. And here we can find several patterns, such as the segregation phenomenon that you see over here. Lane formation is also the word used for that. We can have oscillatory flows at bottlenecks. We can have stripe formation. So there are many self-organization phenomena occurring spontaneously in the crowd. It's not being organized by any laws or policemen or whatever. It just happens by interactions between the people. Now, those kinds of phenomena become ever more important. And if we thought that big data would basically fix this problem, unfortunately, we are wrong. Certainly, we're coming from times where we didn't have enough data to take good decisions. Now we have a lot of data. We can do evidence-based decision-making, but data volume overtakes processing power and systemic complexity overtakes data volume. So even though we have more data than ever and better technology than ever in human history, it seems like we're losing control of the world as we try to control it in a top-down way. And we need to have new control approaches. Unfortunately, there are some, namely distributed control, and that is behind the self-organization phenomena that I mentioned. So as we network the world, the complexity typically increases, and the properties of the nodes, that could be people, companies, whatever, are becoming less important as compared to the interactions between the nodes. So we need to change our perspective from the components of the system to the interactions between the components. And in fact, in network systems, we often don't see the intended effects, but instead we would see side effects, feedback effects, or cascading effects. And such cascading effects can cause that a very small disruption could actually mess up the entire system due to chain reactions or domino effects. And this is what we've been seeing, for example, in the financial system, where the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers caused the bankruptcy of hundreds of banks. And of course, that was extremely costly to the societies around the world. And the problems is still not fixed. In fact, many problems in the world result from systemic instabilities, crowd disasters where people die even though nobody wants this to happen, unstable supply chains, booms and recessions in the economic system, spreading of crime, tragedies of the commons such as overfishing or destruction of the environment, or conflicts as a result of social instabilities. Could also be revolutions. And we're finally mentioning a less dramatic example, which is phantom traffic jams, where you can see that an undesirable outcome happens even though nobody wants this to happen because of amplification and domino effects. So there's no accident over here and no apparent reason for this. It's just the strong interactions that make the system get out of control in a sense. Now there's good news though. We can understand many of these phenomena. Computational social science is addressing them. And in fact, freeway traffic was a subject of investigation for many years. And even now, there are sometimes pretty complex patterns. We can basically understand them as a combination of certain kind of characteristic elementary patterns, which can be understood and simulated in a computer using simple computer models. And we can also theoretically understand under what conditions we would be able to find certain kind of congestion patterns. So there are many of them, as I showed you. And in the meantime, we're able to calculate the extension of congestion patterns and also the delays. So we have really gained a good understanding using what some people call traffic physics. And that understanding has also led to new solutions. So for example, as you will see over here, we can, on the one hand, understand the stop and go traffic that many of you have experienced many times. But we will also be able to get rid of this by changing the interactions between the cars. So once we're annoyed enough, we'll just leave the car and take a helicopter. And that will allow us to see the reason for that stop and go traffic. There is an on-ramp where some cars are trying to get on the freeway. That creates small disruptions. Those disruptions are amplified, causes stop and go traffic. Now we will switch on a traffic assistance system. We assume that a certain percentage of cars is equipped with a system that can measure distances and relative velocity, say with a laser sensor, and automatically adjust the acceleration, deceleration. I mean, implement automatic driving. But cars only respond to the car ahead. There's no centralized control over here. We just changed the way of interaction a little bit, and as you could see, we got rid of the traffic jam. So self-organization causes traffic jams under certain conditions, but if we can change the interactions, the outcome would also change. So the trick here is to apply real-time measurement and real-time feedback to change the interactions in a favorable way, such that the system by itself would dissolve the traffic jams. Now, a similar approach can also be applied to urban traffic. So in many cities, you would see such a situation. And I've been inspired in Egypt, close to the Giza pyramids, actually, by the self-organization that we see at this intersection over here. It's quite surprising, highly diverse traffic participants, no traffic lights, no policemen, and still it seems like nobody has to wait. There's a reason for this, and which is the design. We have a unidirectional traffic flow in front, the opposite unidirectional flow in the back, and there is a small buffer in here which allows people to adjust their speed in such a way that they would find a gap in the flow when they have to cross. Now, we can use that principle in using also modern technology such as the Internet of Things. And how to do that? We've been inspired by pedestrian flows at bottlenecks, where we find those emergent oscillations as if there was a traffic light, but there's none. And we said intersections are also basically a bottleneck just for more different kinds of flows. So couldn't we define a pressure principle that would by itself come up with oscillatory flows? So the traffic would control the traffic lights rather than the other way around, as it happens today. And of course, that has been published. And the question now is, how effective and efficient is that? So let's compare three different approaches. The left one is what we have today. There's a control center that collects data, and it's trying to come up with an optimal traffic control. Unfortunately, there are so many possible solutions that they cannot check out all those solutions in real time, so they need to make some simplifications and come up with an optimal control for a situation which is not really there. That means it's not optimal. But anyway, I'm already telling you a few secrets. Now the next thing is very different. Here, each intersection would basically, in a self-organized way, try to minimize travel time of those cars in the neighboring road sections. We could call that a homo economicus approach. So every intersection is trying to do the best job it can do, but it doesn't care about the others. So it's selfish. It's not coordinated. And this one is the same as the middle one, just it pays attention to the neighboring intersections, other regarding, because when there's a long traffic jam, it will be cleared before it goes back to the travel time minimization. So we would think this is probably best because it coordinates intersections. That's the second best, and this other regarding approach is the worst, intuitively. And let's see what really happens. So top-down regulation creates the red line as we use the intersection capacity more heavily. The queue length of cars increases, and that's what we expect. But the selfish optimization a la homo economicus is working much better. However, there's a certain critical capacity where the queue lengths explode and where the principle of self-organization doesn't work anymore. So we can say that Adam Smith's invisible hand works over here, but it fails over here at high traffic volumes. And there is, of course, a need of coordination, and that's why we are paying a lot of money to traffic control centers, right? Millions, in fact. But the other regarding approach turns out, that's the blue line, to be better than both other approaches all over the entire traffic volume. And so we can make the invisible hand work by, again, changing the interactions between the components in the system. And bottom-up self-organization can outsmart top-down control. Now that was a theoretical study, and then we approached the city of Dresden because I was there before I changed to Zurich. And they said, altogether, we're happy with our traffic control, but we have a problem here in the center where we do have an up-to-date traffic control that produces green waves, but we'd like to prioritize public transportation. And there are a lot of trams and buses, in fact, that cut through this area in different ways. And if they would prioritize, it would interrupt the green waves and basically create a mess and a monster traffic jam. So they couldn't do both, but we could. And it turns out that there were benefits for all traffic participants in still a computer-based study. Then later on, Dresden implemented the principle at some traffic lights. They were very happy with it. And in the meantime, it's also being implemented in the city of Lucerne and other cities. I'm not directly involved, but my previous PhD student is. And you can see over here how significantly, actually, the queues are reduced by that new self-organized traffic light control. So that approach produces more green for everyone. Seems impossible, but it has been shown independently by another institute at ETH Zurich. Now the question is, would we have a better approach in times of machine learning and artificial intelligence? And it turns out, no, actually not. It just takes a long time for those systems to learn. And I mean, that burns a lot of energy. Things get even more dramatic if we are looking at disrupted systems. And of course, the world of today is a disrupted system. The disrupted system can be managed well by the self-organized traffic light control that I just introduced to you. But the machine learning would have to restart learning, and so it's really performing pretty poorly. In other words, AI is a nice thing to have, but it's not the solution for all the problems in the world, even though we're told so. And we need really to think about where to use it in what way, and where we need to use other approaches. Altogether, in systems that are complex with heterogeneous elements, large degrees of fluctuations of short-term predictability, decentralized control, using principles of self-organization can outperform centralized control approaches. And this is really important because if the problems are so big that it's about life and death of people, we need to have the best possible solution and not just one that somebody decided to implement. Now, these kinds of insights can be used also in logistics and supply chains. In fact, there are some similarities to traffic jams. I've been involved in particular in one project with Infineon Technologies many years back. Here you can see that a data-driven approach doesn't help because if you change parameters a little bit, the interpolation between two experiments is not predicting the outcome well. That's also because of the complexity of interactions. And so they didn't manage to run those production machines of semi-conductor plates in the best possible way. And we were able to improve their throughput by more than 30%. That's quite significant. And how did we do that? Applying a counterintuitive slower is faster effect. We slowed down certain processes in the system in order to allow for better coordination. And so it worked, and they were very happy, and I was worth many millions. I didn't get anything from this, but anyway, it benefited the world. And similar principles, of course, could be applied to logistics, food logistics in particular. And there, of course, we need to get the food into the place where the food is needed quickly enough so the food is still in a good condition. And in fact, at the moment, at least a third of food is wasted. So we could nourish a lot more people if we would have a better logistic and a better economic system. Now, we have tried to think that further towards a socio-ecological finance system for participatory sustainability. Today, we have wasteful supply chains where we use new resources, produce certain products in large numbers, try to make people buy the products, and then after some time they would be thrown away, and that wastes a lot of resources. And everyone knows that if you had a circular economy and reused resources, then those resources of the world would be sufficient for a lot more people and allow for a better quality of life for billions. But at the moment, in countries like Switzerland, industrialized countries, we produce 50 tons of waste in a lifetime. And a lot of those waste products could be reused and recycled. Just by means of laws, we have not been effective to get there. Now, however, there's a new approach. We have the Internet of Things, and we could be using it in a participatory way, basically measure externalities of our consumption and production and behavior to get a picture of the side effects. We could measure noise and CO2 and all sorts of emissions and poisons, but also good things. And so what we want to reach basically is to increase positive externalities, reduce negative ones, and ensure a fair compensation. And so our proposal is to combine the Internet of Things with new kinds of money, could be blockchain or other, to create new incentive systems, and not just one. At the moment, we basically have a one-dimensional money system, I would say. Here we could have a different bank account or accounting for each resource, each kind of measurement. So we would have multiple incentives, and implementing this would basically create new forces in the market and thereby change the economy eventually by means of self-organization and co-evolution towards a more and more circular and sharing economy. So rather than enforcing it by regulation, which has not been extremely efficient when it comes to a circular economy, we could use self-organization and technology in order to produce the forces that would drive the system into a new state. Now, an outlook, because you could ask, what does that have to do with diplomacy? Well, some diplomacy certainly has to do a lot with resource shortages and food shortages and so on. And certainly this is of importance for life and death of many people. But we are also working on other subjects that you might be interested in. So altogether, we're combining computer simulations, data science, experiments, and participatory platforms in our team. So we have a rich methodology, and we try to bring those different approaches together. We are using the decision science laboratory to make lab, but also online experiments. Also, we're using virtual reality technology in the meantime. And I've been engaged with the TU Delft in a program called Engineering Social Technologies for a Responsible Digital Future. In particular, we have thought about ways to digitally upgrade democracy. And how can that be done? We have not been arguing for EIDs, but instead we have been investigating, and still do this, how voting approaches can be improved. So there are better approaches than majority voting, depending on the problems to be solved. And in particular, if you need to have trust of the population in difficult decisions, such as those that were connected to COVID, then it makes sense to have a more sophisticated voting approach. We've been working on participatory platforms. EmpowerPolis was one. Another one was called GripInNet. Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to maintain that anymore, but University of Geneva is keeping it alive, so thank you. And we've been working on an app for value-sensitive shopping behavior in order to promote sustainable consumption, rather than trying to nudge people and manipulate their behavior. And this is an approach based on informational self-determination and the values that the consumers actually want to achieve in their life. And it turns out many consumers would like to shop in a more sustainable and more healthy way. And this approach has been shown to be effective. So we've also implemented that. There was an app, it was tested in 2 shops. We've also been working on concepts for disaster situations. And it turns out that if communication breaks down and you still want to have some communication, you can create an ad hoc network based on smartphones. But of course, those smartphones have limited battery, and basically, in order to keep up that communication for 3 days, which is the period after which the government comes to rescue, you basically need to organize the communication in a way that saves battery of phones that are basically on little battery. And it turns out that with this fairness-oriented approach, we have a much longer endurance of that communication system, but also, of course, the ability of the community to help itself, to help others, is increased a lot. So everyone benefits from that fairness-oriented approach. This is just one element of a broader concept that we call participatory resilience. In the past, people have been thinking about what happens if there has been a disruption of the system, and they've been talking about degraded recovery and anti-fragility. But in principle, we could also use co-evolution to improve the system steadily. We don't need disasters to improve the system. And another approach to unleash the potential of participation of the citizenship is what we call City Olympics. It's an approach that is trying to unleash collective intelligence by networking different stakeholders and cities, and combining competition with cooperation. And this way, make a huge leap forward in terms of addressing the grand challenges of this world. With this, I'm at the end of my talk, and I'd like to underline that we need solutions that acknowledge and embrace the complexity of the system. And many of those approaches that we're using today are not necessarily doing it to the extent we could be doing. Thank you.